Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Lunch and Learn today. My name is Deborah Olashansky and I serve as the Jewish Community Relations Director for the Jewish Federation of Nashville. Thank you all for joining us. We are really thrilled to have our guests here today representing the Moving Nashville Forward initiative. We have three guests with us today. Jamal Campbell Gooch is the Deputy Director of Gideon's Army and the Vice Chair of the Nashville Community Oversight Board, born and raised in zip code 37208. And Reed Etzel has a background in communications and strategy. He's a Nashville native and a graduate student in the Vanderbilt University Owen School of Management. And David Young is a retired management consultant formerly working for Ankara and C3 Consulting, and he is volunteering for this effort. So I will turn it over to David for some opening comments, and then we will get right into the presentation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for that intro, Deborah. First, I just wanted to communicate how enthusiastic I am about this initiative. I've been a volunteer working with Reed and Jamel for a few months now, and they've got a great presentation that's going to lay out how this program is going to work, but I wanted to just highlight some of the things that really drew me to it. The idea of a guaranteed basic income has been around since at least the 70s. And there are good reasons for that. One is that dollars go further when they stay as dollars. You don't have middlemen and you don't have overhead. There's dignity in giving people money and trusting them to use that money wisely. There's a recognition that being poor is just wildly risky, that bad stuff happens to everybody. But if you are poor, you don't have the ability to overcome any bumps in the road. And guaranteed basic income gives you the kind of stability that you and I take for granted. Reed and Jamel are going to talk about the pros and cons of these programs and how they're being proven by social scientists and economists. But some results are already in particular from Stockton, California, and they show improvements in happiness and health, school attendance, trust in social institutions, and they reduce crime and they improve income earning capability. Secondly, I just wanted to point out that Jamel and Reed are the right leaders for this organization. Jamel is known by lots of people in Nashville. His roots are working in the violence interruption area. He knows North Nashville, its history, its promise. He's got the trust of the community. Reed and Jamel have succeeded in attracting really the top social scientist who does these kinds of guaranteed basic income projects, Dr. Stacia Martin West. And so if you Google her name, you'll find her appearing on the PBS NewsHour, and she's the real deal for these kinds of programs. And then they have shown their ability to successfully do this sort of advocacy. Some of you may be aware of the Driving While Black report. Well, Jamel was in the center of that when that was being produced, and that really affected real policy change. And we're looking for the same sort of pattern here, where we do an experiment, we produce a report, and that is the springboard for policy changes. So finally, I wanted to highlight that you all are really part of this experiment. We're trying to show that in a place like Nashville, Tennessee, with its history, that there are people in the public who are willing to put their money and their support behind a project like this. And that demonstrates real grassroots support to the political leaders. And so we're asking you not only for money, but to think about if you would want to host this kind of event with people in your network as well. So that's my intro, and I'm going to hand it over to Reed.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, David. David is one of our most effective advocates. Sometimes it feels like he describes what we're trying to do better than we can. But thank you for that, David. And thank you to Deborah and to all of you guys for being here. My name is Reed Etzel. As David said, I'm a Nashville native. I grew up in West Nashville, and I moved away for a over a decade, moved back here a couple of years ago, and really decided that I needed to lean into working to make Nashville a place that worked for everybody as well as it did for me. And through that work, I met Jamel. And over the past 18 months, we've been working to create a guaranteed basic income pilot in North Nashville. I'll let Jamel introduce himself now, and then we'll get into a little bit more about exactly what we're doing.
So, hey, everybody, really extremely thankful to be here. Thankful for y'all presence. I see a lot of people who we've actually done this presentation in front of before. So like Reed said, we've been building to this moment for 18th month. And just like the Driving While Black report, which was mentioned earlier, we are planning to present not only research, but a very diverse and wide-stretching coalition of people who believe that a guaranteed basic income is something that our city should have in its pocket, a tool on its tool belt as it tries to actually eradicate poverty for so many of Nashvillians. And we got here in a very, very specific way, but if I can shorten it all up, essentially during the tornado recovery, and if you remember, it was a short time right before COVID hit Nashville, we were actually working to start doing cash distributions. We had, me and Reed had came in contact with an organization called Give Directly, who does direct cash distributions to people who have experienced a loss due to a natural disaster. But unfortunately, we were unable to actually do those direct cash distributions because COVID hit shortly after. But this opened up a world of guaranteed basic income that, like David said, has been done across the globe since the 70s, but also is not new to Tennessee. In Gallenberg, when they all had those fires, the My People's Foundation was created by the Dollywood Foundation. And what they ended up doing is they ended up putting 900 families on a guaranteed basic income using $9 million. And those 900 families actually reported significant benefits to having a guaranteed basic income. So to this point, we have been hosting these. We have been really excited to be able to bring this here. Also, this is happening in a moment where our country is doing this across their cities. There's 53 other pilots happening currently, but we are the only one that looks like this, where we are making our way, having a conversation with people. This is, I think, our 67th presentation to community groups. But we're really making sure that everybody understands why we're doing this, what we are doing this for, and what we know will happen once people are able to experience a guaranteed basic income. But before we get into this presentation, we have a really short video that lays out both the narrative that we kind of rest our guaranteed basic income in, the effects that we can expect, and then also just the narrative around people that are struggling with poverty, some of the preconceived notions that we have that are actually going to be called into question with one of these type of pilots. And while we get that up, just to give people a brief overall, what we're going to do is, and I'd like to announce this now, we are actually going to start our micro pilot pretty soon. So we're hoping that we'll be able to do between 25 and 30 families. And then we will go into another phase where we will do a larger pilot throughout Nashville, and we will deliver a report detailing what the effects of a guaranteed basic income on people and families that are struggling with poverty. But we're gonna listen up for this real quick video. It is a real short 2-minute video, essentially talking about the guaranteed basic income pilot. And I think, Reed, I think you will have to unmute.
Thank you for that reminder.
And the video is muted on, yep.
Yeah.
North Nashville is Nashville's soul. And Nashville dead-ended it when it built Interstate 40 through its heart. Moving Nashville forward is launching a guaranteed basic income pilot to disrupt poverty in our city. Starting in the 37208 zip code, North Nashville, where we can begin to address this harm. The interstate permanently scarred and isolated the area. 80% of Black-owned businesses in Nashville closed as a result, devastating it economically and creating the conditions of poverty there today. North Nashville has an average income of less than half of Nashville's living wage. Families are struggling with the impact of decades of over-policing, the aftermath of a tornado, and rapid gentrification. They lack access to jobs that pay a living wage, healthcare, and social services. We can change this by investing in the people of North Nashville. Like similar experiments in this country and around the world, the 37208 demonstration will offer direct cash transfers and track their impact on people and the community. For a family living in poverty, this means the ability to pay bills on time, to put food on the table, and to keep young people off the streets. It means the ability to plan for the future. With enough resources and support, we can begin to end poverty, starting in North Nashville. The 37208 demonstration will make North Nashville and Davidson County a model for a more prosperous future. Our findings will provide a roadmap to repeating this experiment and a plan to create more equitable cities. We can disrupt poverty in North Nashville and restore Nashville's soul. Support the 37208 demonstration, donating today.
So while we read, you're about to say something?
I was just going to say thank you for listening, and I hope that resonated with you, Jamel. Whatever you were going to say, I'll get the slide deck up.
Yeah, so we're gonna walk through the slides, but we really want to teach you all. I know this is a lunch and learn, but we want to go back and forth. We think the biggest part of this piece is in the dialogue. So if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to drop them in the chat. No question is out of bounds. We want to make sure not only if you are so moved that you donate, but also that everyone on this call walks away with a functioning knowledge of what a guaranteed basic income is and why we are doing this in Nashville. That's a really short video. We have a couple of things kind of similar, but like I said, this is what we talked about. This is moving Nashville forward, the 37208 demonstration. Reed, we're not seeing, I think you shared the wrong window. We're just seeing a blue screen. But while we get that up, we also have been working to build a diverse coalition that includes various organizing institutions across Davidson County. But as we get into this, like we said before, this is not a new idea. This is not a revolutionary idea. This is something that is happening across the country, but not in this fashion. We are the only guaranteed basic income pilot that is both people-centered, people-led, and that is taking the time to make sure everyday community members, working class folks like the folks on this call, actually understand what a guaranteed basic income is and how it can improve both people struggling with poverty and people that are not struggling with poverty. Reed, you can go to the first slide. So, like we said before, we couch this in the historical narrative of our community and Nashville. So everything that Nashville is known for has been born out of the community members living in North Nashville, from being known to the Music City, which we earned that nickname from the Jubilee Singers, performing on a world tour, and the Queen of England actually saying, "You all must come from a city of music," down to even our city being known as a progressive city due to the activism and the community organizing happening in the 60s because of the students that were participating in the student sit-ins, the freedom rides across the South, and really taking on and winning against Jim Crow. But with all of that power, what ended up happening is anti-Black policies, racist city officials ended up actually destroying North Nashville by weaponizing city infrastructure and driving an interstate directly through it in the late 60s. So what essentially ended up happening is 37208 was dead-ended by the interstate. One thing that if you all are ever driving through North Nashville, I lived there for quite a long time. One thing you realize is how many of the avenues just straight up dead end or loop around in a very unique, awkward way. And usually what's on the opposite end of that is the interstate. So if you see, if you kind of look through this, 620 homes were destroyed, 27 apartment buildings, 6 churches were demolished, and over 50 streets were dead end. And I think the most startling piece of this is the 80% of Black businesses that ended up closing due to the construction of the interstate. And if you just broaden that out and think of that on a more national scale, if 80% of businesses closed across this country, we would consider that a recession, a depression, definitely an economic downturn. But in North Nashville, that was done with the idea that we were actually improving the city. And so we really rest ourselves, and we're hoping that the guarantee, and we know that the guaranteed basic income is a step in intentionally rebuilding this community that was harmed by racism and anti-Black policies.
So we just showed you the video, right? We're talking about investing in the people of North Nashville. What we can do with a guaranteed income pilot in North Nashville is not only begin to heal the harm that we've talked to you about, but it's also about building forward a better future for our city. Right? It's about demonstrating the impact that a guaranteed income can have in any community. All of the problems that we see today in Nashville intersect in North Nashville. And if we can demonstrate the power of a guaranteed income there, then we can also convince a wider swath of the city and hopefully our elected officials that this is a policy worth entertaining for any community where there are people struggling with poverty in Nashville and beyond. So the 37208 demonstration will create a guaranteed basic income pilot that sends resources directly where they're needed most, directly to North Nashville. We've talked about the tornado, the history of anti-racist policy and over-policing and the impact of the interstate. You know, this is a community that desperately needs additional investment and resources, and that's what we're trying to do first. But we're also modeling this strategy, a way that our city can more effectively invest in its people and build in a way that can build a better future, a more prosperous city that benefits everyone, not just people making people struggling to meet their needs in North Nashville. And so what this will look like, now, actually, we're a little bit behind in updating our deck, but our plan is eventually to implement this pilot that benefits 100 people. What we're launching in November is an initial phase that will likely have 30 recipients. But let me just run through this implementation. All the same partners are involved in this early phase as well as later phases. We're targeting people in North Nashville, in the 37208 zip code. There has never been a guaranteed income pilot that is as geographically focused as this. There are pilots all over the country selecting people around entire cities or people of certain backgrounds, people that have recently exited prison or high school students. There's no pilot in the country that is as geographically focused and grounded in this narrative as ours is. And we're targeting people with income under $40,000. The reason for that is that $40,000 is kind of the level where benefits begin to phase out, where rent subsidies begin to phase out. It's where people run into what they call the benefits cliff, right? In the way that our system works right now, it is sometimes scary for someone to pursue additional income because they might lose the things that are allowing them to take care of their loved ones today, right? It turns that additional income into a risk. We're going to distribute $10,000 over 10 months to a year to all of our recipients. As I said, in this initial phase, there will be 30 recipients, but our goal in 2022 is to is to raise the money to be able to distribute to 100 or more families. We're going to provide access to advocacy and coaching to those that want them. But mostly what we're going to be doing is providing a community of people who are working through these issues themselves. There is no requirement that any participant in this program go through any sort of financial literacy program. A guaranteed income is based on the idea that if we trust people to take care of their needs, they will. And that is part of it's part of the idea that we are gathering information about. And then finally, we're going to track the impact of this, not only on individuals. That's been done in Stockton, California, in Sevier County, Tennessee, in Gatlinburg, where the fires happened that we mentioned earlier. But we're also going to look at the community as a whole. And how does this investment change the community as a whole? This is the work that Jamel has been engaged in through violence interruption for years now. And we're going to be working with some of the leading researchers in the country to do this. We've partnered with the Center for Guaranteed Income Research at the University of Pennsylvania. We're working with Income Movement, which is a national grassroots organization, to draw attention to this program and what we're trying to achieve here in Nashville. And we're going to be able to produce a report that not only shows these individual impacts, but frames this in a larger conversation about what's happening in the country and what can happen in Nashville. And now, when we talk about the impact of this, right, we already know what a guaranteed income can do in a community. The best example of this is the same researchers that we're working with have delivered a report about the Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration, which took place in Stockton, California. And what they found is that people's, this first one is obvious, people's savings increase, but also people's resilience, right? There's a statistic out there that I think half of the people in the United States are unable to deal with an unexpected $500 expense. A car breaking down, a medical emergency, these things that are common random occurrences, right? These are the things that put people into poverty. A guaranteed income creates a buffer that allows someone to deal with that. Beyond that, though, you see improvements in mental and physical health, literal lowering of levels of cortisol, stress hormones, increased long-term income, right? The strongest narrative, the strongest talking point that people use to oppose a guaranteed income is often that it causes people to drop out of the workforce. We've seen this happening in our state recently around the conversation about COVID benefits. The reality is that in these places where it's been studied, people might stop working a part-time job for the short term, but in the long term, what they're doing is investing in their long-term income, right? This is about, the decision isn't, I'm going to stop working and live off of these benefits. The decision is, these benefits have given me the chance to look for a job that allows me to better take care of my needs, right? To find a full-time job that has benefits for my family. And these are the types of impacts that they saw in Stockton over the course of their experiment. And then finally, breaking the stereotype that we're all socialized with, that poverty is some sort of moral failing, that people are making bad decisions, that particularly people of color don't know how to manage their money, right? This is a central part of why this is so important in North Nashville. We need to break down this stereotype so that we can build an argument for a robust floor in our community that no one should be under, that is an investment not only in those individuals, but our entire community as a whole. And then finally, through the publication of a report, we've seen in the past the impact that putting numbers and narrative on a page can have, not only in our city, but in other cities. But Jamel's work in the past on the Driving While Black report is a great example of this, where just by presenting the reality, the real impact of policing on Black drivers in Nashville, it changed the entire narrative around policing in our city, right? It no longer became a question of whether or not there was a problem, right? You see the problem, and we see the path forward. And that's one of the reasons why Nashville is one of the only cities in the South with a community oversight board today. So we really see our change model as the same thing. We're here talking to you guys, as we have many other groups of people, to build a base of people ready to invest in a guaranteed basic income. And when we come back around with this data in a year's time or in 2 years' time, you people, the people that have invested in this pilot, are the ones that will help us to change the narrative around guaranteed income and the need to invest in our communities here in Nashville. I'm going to stop sharing the slides now, and we're going to open it up for questions. But David mentioned, I just want to make one last point. David mentioned that I'm a business school student at the University of Vanderbilt right now. And so my business school classmates look at me like I've got 3 heads sometimes when I start talking about guaranteed income. It's hard for them to see oftentimes that this is an economic issue. This is a business issue. But what I often say to them is, look, if you were managing a company and the way you were managing that company was not achieving the objectives that you purport to achieve, in this case, ending poverty, I think anyone would say that they want to live in a city with less poverty, right? No one's going to argue with you on that point. They might argue with you on what the pathway to that. The reality is that we have decades of evidence to show that we are not ending poverty. We are sustaining poverty, and in some cases making it worse with the way that we deal with people in poverty in our city. And it's insanity that we're not willing to test different approaches to this. A guaranteed income might not be a panacea, the solution to everything. It is an approach to disrupting poverty that shows incredibly promising results. And Nashville deserves an experiment in this policy. Simply as that. And with that, I'll shut up for a little while and answer your questions.
Yeah, so please feel free to drop the most difficult question that you can think about into the chat. We love this part of this conversation where we're able to actually struggle with each other and have a very honest conversation around a guaranteed basic income. I did want to mention one thing while people have an opportunity to put their questions in the chat. There are 2 different branches of a guaranteed basic income, where it's like some want people to take away people's benefits and give them direct cash, while others want to give them direct cash and include that in their benefits. We are the ones who want to include that in their benefits with the idea of giving folks the best possible chance to actually come off of it in the first place. So just wanted to mention that here. I think that's a very important distinction between our ideologies and other other guaranteed basic income advocate organizations' ideologies. But yes, excited about the questions that are coming.
So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off and invite people to put questions in the chat. So it's interesting to me that you start your presentation with the building of the interstate, because when I first moved to Nashville a few years ago, a good friend gifted me with a copy of David Halberstam's book, The Children. And if for anyone who hasn't read that book, I would encourage it. It gives a really good history of the civil rights movement here in Nashville and really the damage that the interstate did. And so it's interesting to me that that's where you start, because so much of the damage did start from that time. Also, many of us on this call were amongst the volunteers, Jamal, up there working with Gideon's Army in the post-tornado, in that window after tornado, before COVID. And now when I'm through those neighborhoods, I see a lot of gentrification. And I'm wondering, how has that affected the neighborhood, and what effect might that have on this whole project?
Well, I'll answer it in reverse, because I think it's an important nugget of civil rights history, even doing this guaranteed basic income in North Nashville. But when it comes to gentrification, just straight up, we know that we have a wave of mass evictions coming again, which we were struggling with probably like 2 months ago, but we just had mass evictions. And the evictions are interesting because even when the organizations are trying to pay folks' bills or their rent that they're behind on, the landlords don't take them sometimes because they want to raise rents. So we're hoping and we're very interested to see how giving folks a guaranteed basic income, instead of trying to pay their bills for them, what it would look like if we actually just gave them the money and allowed them to continue to deal with their landlords and take care of their own affairs, which the data shows that people are more likely to not be displaced when you give them a guaranteed basic income to make up for it. And then the second piece is a lot of times the involvement of the students of North Nashville, Meharry, Tennessee State University, Fish University, American Baptist College, goes unnoticed when talking about the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King. Usually when you see a photo of Martin Luther King, people focus in on him, but usually the people around him have a direct association to Nashville. And before he was assassinated, the campaign that he was working on was called the Poor People's Campaign. And one pivotal piece of the Poor People's Campaign was a guaranteed basic income and a federal jobs, in a guaranteed federal job. So actually getting this done in guaranteed in North Nashville is actually pushing and pulling on that tradition of being involved in civil rights. And also, we are in a coalition, the National Economic Justice Alliance, who's actually been doing this work before we ever came on the scene. And they really, really rest on picking up the torch that the Poor People's Campaign left behind.
Does that answer your question?
That's part of, yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing question. Right. So we do have a question in the chat, and then I have some other questions as well. But other than an income ceiling of $40K, what other criteria are used to qualify participants?
So part of our methodology is to keep. Not sure why my video popped off there. Part of our methodology is to keep that those requirements as light as possible. And the reason for that is to get the best quality data about what a guaranteed income is, right? A guaranteed income is the simple difference between a guaranteed income and a universal income is that there is a means test, right? When we get into splitting out people in more and more with different filters, obviously you could target down to the people who have the most acute need, but our goal here is number one, to get resources into the community, but number two, to build an argument for a system that can be used to efficiently disrupt poverty on a larger scale, and that's why we're not filtering out, for instance, for families that only families that have children. This is the way that this research has been conducted nationally, and really the design of this program, we're just communicating it. This is how the researchers that we partnered with have recommended that we design this program in order to create the biggest impact. One point though, and that is that there will be some selection against people, for instance, who are receiving Social Security, which is the benefit that is, so people over a certain age, which is the benefit that is most sensitive to receiving these types of benefits. Anyone who enrolls in the program will be kind of oriented to the potential interactions that this has with other benefits, and it's unlikely that someone receiving Social Security will choose to participate for that reason.
So this next question sort of follows up to that a bit, which is if you could tell us more about the research itself and what specific outcomes you'll be tracking.
Well, so This is actually kind of an evolving question because this is a development in the past couple weeks where we really decided to go ahead with this initial micro pilot launching in November. And that the research around that pilot is going to be much more narrative focused, really focusing on storytelling about the people receiving that benefit and how it's changing their lives. The plan is, and the plan always was, to deliver a larger pilot where there will be a group of people that are receiving the benefit and a group of people that are not receiving the benefit. The only difference between those people will be the fact that will be that benefit. They will be randomly selected from among applicants in North Nashville by our research partners. And the outcomes that we'll track will be similar to those that they tracked in Stockton. For instance, self-reported level of savings, people reporting their level of stress over the course of the study, as well as focus groups of both recipients of the benefit and people not receiving the benefit, of just kind of reporting on the health of their community and how they are feeling about their income security. This is, again, the methodology that's been developed by the researchers at the Center for Guaranteed Income Research. And they're overseeing, I think, 15 or 20 pilots around the country at the moment. These are the people that are really leading the charge forward in research about this issue.
Okay, so yeah, another question from the chat. If you could give us more details, like this one-time gift of $10,000 per recipient, is there accountability for how it's spent?
So it's not a one-time gift. It will be $1,000 installments over 10 months. And the simple answer is no. There are no requirements for them to tell us how they spend the money. The way that we will be distributing the money is through a partner. A company called Steady is our likely partner for this. They began as a platform to help wage workers make better decisions about which jobs to take and how that would affect their income. But through that app, they're able to see generally, categorically, where people spend their money. In the research in Stockton, I think, which is the best analogy for this, 80% of the money was spent on basic necessities, from rent to car repairs and gas to food and utilities. 1% of the money in Stockton was spent, or less than 1% was spent on, things that critics of a guaranteed income might say people are going to spend all their money on, like cigarettes and alcohol. But the vast majority of the money in these studies has been spent on necessities. And Jamel, I think you have something to say here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this question kind of points to where we are and the narrative that we're trying to replace. Like, the majority of the data, even coming out of Stockton, coming out of Gatlinburg, but also coming out of the state of Alaska, who's done a guaranteed basic income since the 70s, is that people take care of their basic needs because the need is so great immediately. And then second, I wanted to mention that I know it's me, Reed, and David here, which we are all volunteers. I know it's me, Reed, and David here talking to you all, but we represent a diverse coalition that also includes, that we're hoping that we can include the Metro Health Department and a lot of local stakeholders, and making sure that we can both get this done in best practices and make sure that the report that we're delivering thoroughly lays out how not only a guaranteed basic income helps improve the material conditions of people struggling with poverty in Nashville, but also serves as a roadmap for other communities to actually advocate on their own behalf to actually get this done on a policy level. And I think that's important to mention, because me and Reed often talk about how we're not trying to set up a new nonprofit. We don't want a private institution to do this, because a private institution cannot do this on the scale that we need it to be done. We're simply going to offer a pilot and then guide the city in doing this on a scale where everyone can feel the benefits of a guaranteed basic income.
Thanks, Jamal. And so the next two questions kind of relate, and so I'm going to kind of rephrase them and ask it a little bit differently. So what are the criticisms, like who would be opposed to this? And then also, how do you frame it so it's not viewed only as a quote unquote liberal solution or only quote unquote seen from one side of the partisan aisle? Like what are the criticisms and how can you respond to them in a post-partisan or I feel like even bipartisan is troublesome, so post-partisan solution.
Well,
I think.
Go ahead, Jamel. I'll follow on you.
I think we have to uplift. I think we have to uplift pilots that are working in all parties, cities. Right, like I said, they're happening across the country, and those cities look very differently everywhere. I mean, they're happening in cities across the South, on the coast, in the Midwest, all over the place. And so I think we have to constantly be uplifting those things. That is not only because I think we have a tendency to hyper focus in on certain areas, certain people getting it, but I think we just have to keep broadening the conversation. And by broadening the conversation, the reality is that the people that are pushing for a guaranteed basic income are a diverse group of political beliefs, socioeconomic positions, race, color. It supersedes everything at this point because the need is across the board and everyone is feeling it.
And I think, this is a really important question, right? It's one of the reasons why we think it's important that there be a guaranteed basic income pilot here in Nashville. This city looks different than Stockton, California, and Stockton, the state of California now has a budget to start experimenting statewide with a guaranteed basic income. We are obviously a very different place. It's important that the South be part of this conversation because of our history. The initial advocacy for guaranteed income started here in the civil rights movement, but also because of our political makeup today. One anecdotal thing that we're doing is I'm in the process of organizing a forum at Vanderbilt to have a discussion within Owen about this, right? My classmates fall across a pretty broad spectrum that leans to the right, but that's just one piece. Another piece of this is we've been exploring partnership with other institutions that are supporting that are supportive of this across a much broader spectrum. One of them is the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. They've actually done a lot of work around guaranteed income and interactions with benefits. And so it's an ongoing question. There's no doubt that today this is viewed as a progressive liberal project. I think gathering the data and showing that for instance, the racial wealth gap is the biggest drag on our economy, right? If Black people in this country were on the same level as white people in this country, the American economy would still be bigger than China's. There's a real economic argument there. McKinsey, for instance, is putting out pieces of research about that exact point. We are at the beginning of this process, but it's necessary to gather this data, and it's with a pilot that we start that process. Jamel's also said in the chat that Jackson, Mississippi is actually the only other city that has a community generated guaranteed income initiative. They're also on the leading edge of this. And this is, we feel very strongly that it's bringing this conversation to the South that will help to bring that forward because of the nature of your community, and every part of this community in Nashville is politically diverse.
I'm going to go ahead and ask Avi Poster, my sort of co-host for the call, to unmute, and he can ask his question directly.
Hi, guys. I've heard you several times, and each time I learn more. And the thing that keeps resonating to me is that this effort is aimed at disrupting the cycle of poverty. We've done this, throughout my lifetime, and we've had varying success, but we're still stuck. And what I love about what you're doing is that you're making also a statement to this community that disrupting poverty needs to be at the front of our plate, not in the back burner. And I don't have a question for you. I just have what we say in our tradition, kol hakavod, which is much applause, because what you're doing is you're reminding us as a community that when we wake up every Monday morning, the first question we should ask is, how are we helping the people who are struggling the most? And our city government is not doing that on a weekly basis. And we need people like you to remind us that as a community, we could stand up and do this. So I'm no question. I just wanted to applaud you guys.
Thanks, Abhi. And Jamel, somewhere earlier in the call, we mentioned the violence interruption program. And I know there's many on this call who are interested, but also some who might not know about it. And I wonder, Jamel, if you could just share a little bit more about that program and how that relates to the overall needs in the community of 37208.
I think we might have lost Jamel just before you asked that question, unfortunately. I'd love to encourage Jamel to share some information with you guys that maybe you can share with the group later on. Obviously, the work that he's just texted me and said that he's out in the community and had to deal with something that came up.
Okay.
So.
Right. He's out there doing the work, right?
Doing that work right now. That obviously the violence interruption that Jamel's been working on is such an important thing. It's approaching this issue from a different place. And one of the things that Jamel has taught me is that violence interruption is something that needs to be done by members of that community, right? It's not a thing that I can show up and help with. It's not a thing that any of us on this call can show up and help with. However, we kind of in our thinking about this designed moving Nashville forward as a way, as a kind of another leg of the same stool, right? This is a way that we can contribute to that same work of helping to bridge the gap of basic needs. It's in that gap that violence takes place, right? It's when people feel threatened that they're not going to be able to meet the basic needs of their family of food, shelter, clothing, that violence occurs. And that this work on a guaranteed income is intimately intertwined with the work of violence interruption and community building on a broader scale. But this is something that we as a community can invest in and can put our energy into.
So another question related to the city and the city's support or not support, and again, kind of getting back to what the potential criticism might be. So as you develop the research and you can make the solid argument, even if you get the city on board, one of the things that I have seen in my few years here is how often something will be promoted, encouraged, wanted in Nashville, and then the state comes in and basically cuts it off at the knees. Would that be an issue with this program potentially? And how are you planning on dealing with that?
Yes, I think anytime that the city of Nashville or anyone in the city of Nashville tries to do something, I don't know what the right word what the right word to say is. It is a risk. Our goal is to build data that shows that this benefits everyone. One of the things that we've talked about as a potential phase down the road, this isn't a commitment or a promise, but this is just something that we kind of dream about, is maybe the next part of this is in a rural community, and building that, building out that evidence that this isn't just a project to benefit one community in North Nashville or one type of community or one type of person, but that this is something that benefits everyone, I think is a powerful step toward that. We made the strategic decision to not involve the city political leadership in this, because we want this to be driven by people, and we think that that's the most powerful way to build the initial base for this issue at this point in Nashville. It also insulates us from exactly that issue, that kind of preemption at the state level. But if we're talking about a guaranteed income at the state level, this is a long process that we're engaged in, and this is the first step. There are plenty. We all know the people that, like, the arguments that will be made that people don't need handouts, and why them and not us, and some more overtly racist arguments against things like this. Those are old arguments. The way to change this conversation is to introduce new information, and that's why we're really focused on the research aspect of this.
Deborah, if I may add, I don't think preemption would come into play here at all, because as a community, we can do whatever we want with our dollars, even our city government. We're not asking for public policy at this point to be established that the state could challenge, but the city could come up and support this effort without any interference from outside. Getting it passed statewide is another issue. We know what that would look like.
I just want to make sure if there's anyone else who has a question before we continue on. And then I actually have a question for David, if there aren't any other questions right now. And that was to ask David to just say a word about the NOAA, because it kind of also relates the NOAA initiative to support the public schools in general, MNPS, but also specifically in this neighborhood.
And Deborah, are you asking for kind of an update on the Day of Power and Prayer?
Yeah, if you could give just a quick update on that, that would be great. And then also, Reed, if you would post the website about the program, this program again in the chat for people.
What I can say about that was that that was the first time that NOAA really tried to have a statewide event. That by having, I guess 2 Sundays ago, for those of you who don't know, NOAA kind of orchestrated a statewide event that involved their partner organizations in Chattanooga and in Memphis in order to draw attention to the fact that Tennessee doesn't provide the level of funding that they're actually committed to for public schools. There are standards that they have defined as to how many nurses, social workers, and counselors should be available in their schools, and the state has never funded it at that level. And the most upsetting statistic coming out of that is that there are lots of schools that have police present in the school every single day, but they don't have any access to counselors, social workers, or nurses. And so NOAA was trying to put that on the agenda of state legislators to modify, to change their approach. We had hundreds of people participating on that day's event. Some were in person, some were streaming over Facebook. And then we've had 1,300 who have viewed some portion of it on Facebook since then. Now, I can't say whether they watched the whole thing or not, but we really are trying to drive awareness to that issue.
Thank you. And so, Reed, following up on that, just the importance of the public school piece of the neighborhood, and how this project might help with the needs of the students in the schools.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we are a guaranteed basic income pilot, right? We're not focused specifically on schools, but the data shows that families receiving a benefit like this are more likely to keep their kids in school. They're more likely to have a capacity to make sure that their kids stay off the streets after school, right? This is, all of these things intersect. None of these issues can be extracted from one another. And we really think about a guaranteed basic income as kind of the linchpin of all of this. You know, as I said earlier, violence occurs where people are in the gap between people's needs and what they have. Schools fail when there's a lack of parental oversight. Communities fall apart when, or are torn apart when people don't have options. And all of these things can be in part addressed with a guaranteed basic income by just giving people a greater buffer, a room to breathe, room to strategize, and the ability to not work 3 part-time jobs, but to look for 1 full-time job. The ability to choose to maybe take a few less hours at work because you need to spend some time at home with your kid because they're struggling, in math in 4th grade. These are all connected, and we hope that you'll come along with us.
So just as a comment, we do have a comment in the chat about the importance of guidance counselors in schools. And I think that is really so critical. It's always been critical, but I think in this particular moment with the additional stresses of COVID on top of all the other stresses that some of these schools were already facing, I think it just is really so critical to continue to put pressure on our elected officials and the budgeting process to make sure that the schools get what they need. Because again, we all benefit. The better the schools are, we all benefit from that. That shouldn't be any kind of a partisan issue. We all benefit with better schools and better outcomes. So we are coming up on the last few minutes. I'll just be sure there's no final questions or comments from anyone before we wrap. Any closing comments, Reed, that you'd like to make before we close out?
No, I mean, I thank you very much for taking the time in the middle of your day to listen to us. And thank you for giving us the platform to talk about this. And, as a Nashville native, I believe really deeply in the power of our community and the fact that we can come together to make this city better. There's some huge problems here that we are not addressing, that our elected officials are not focusing on. And it's up to us to, as Avi said, wake up every morning and decide to care about them. I think that moving Nashville forward is a really powerful way to do that. I hope that you'll support us. Thank you very much.
Deborah, one of the things I would just suggest to everyone on the call, that if this effort resonates with you, as I'm sure it does, that we share this with friends and family in our community and spread the word through our own social media and our own outreach.
Yeah, and as a reminder, this call has been recorded. It will be uploaded to our JFED of Nashville YouTube channel, and so the link will be available, and it will be able to be shared with anybody who would like to see it. Thank you, Rabbi Jessica, for helping with that already. And
I also wanted to thank you, Deborah, and the committee for making and the roundtable. For bringing us these brilliant nuggets on a regular basis and connecting us with the community. It's so important.
Well, it's our work, it's our pleasure, it's our honor. We will be taking a bit of a break. We are moving into the Jewish holidays, and so we won't be having any calls for the next several weeks, but we will, of course, keep everyone up to date for future such calls. In the meantime, I'd like to just, wish those of you on the call who will be celebrating the Jewish holidays a very Shana Tova Umetuka, very, very sweet New Year, and we wish Jamal, Reed, and David all the best in this endeavor, and we will stay in touch with all of you and continue to share info as you have more of the research and as there's more evidence behind this. We will be happy to continue to share it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you all. Enjoy your weekend,